Welcome to the Essential Craftsman Podcast. I'm Nate, and I could not be more excited about this interview you're about to hear with Radigan Carter. Let me read you from his bio on his website. Radigan Carter is an individual investor who has spent 10 years working on 5 continents in the military, private sector, and government. He has extensive experience leading large multinational teams in the Middle East, Central Asia, and Africa. His current focus is combining his love of history and global trends with first-hand experience overseas to advance his goals of building generational wealth, living well, and helping others make themselves and their communities stronger. He has a civil engineering degree from a military college, an Investigator of the Year award as the case agent on a year-long undercover buy-bust operation breaking up an international fraud ring, and earned a Heroism Award for leadership and actions during a Taliban attack in Afghanistan. Radigan first came onto my radar as a guest on the Hidden Forces podcast, where he had a really deep dive into his background, investment philosophy, and even geopolitics. And I was edge of my seat for that whole conversation. And I highly recommend you check that out. Now, I don't think you have to listen to that in order to enjoy this conversation, but I can basically almost guarantee you if you listen to this interview, you'll probably go find that one next, because Radigan has some just fascinating stories to tell. And I'm sure he's only scratching the surface, but he tells a few of them in more detail in that interview, including how he was blown up in Afghanistan, and including some of what it was like working in the Middle East, building natural gas plants, down to some very specific things about the type of people he's working with and the approach to work that some of those guys take in contrast to what we're used to here. Now, our conversation here is about investing, and it can be tough for people like myself to know how to even approach it. I don't know enough to feel confident risking my money in what feels like a casino of Wall Street, and yet holding on to it is dangerous as well, because the Federal Reserve inflates our money supply and our dollars lose value. So you got to do something, and I feel more positive and have I think a much healthier outlook on investing after this conversation, and I'm going to be continuing to follow Radigan's work. So without any further ado, I really hope you enjoy this conversation with Radigan Carter. Can't thank you enough for taking time to come and talk to us. And I recommended to the viewers that they listen to your interview on Hidden Forces, in particular the one about your background, because I don't want to make you go through that in as much detail again. But I'm going to assume that most people haven't listened to that whole interview. So maybe to start with, could you give us I take all the time you need, but the quick overview, maybe 10 minutes of just being a kid at home to where you're sitting right now and everything that's gone on in your life over that time?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Nate. So just quick background, grew up in Eastern Oregon and did farm work, rough construction growing up. And then about 19, decided I didn't want to keep doing rough framing, so joined the Navy. Got a chance to spend quite a few years in Asia, being deployed out of Japan. Participated in the first deployment to OIF-1, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and then got out, went and got a civil engineering degree, kind of by mistake, at a military college. I showed up and they said, hey, civil engineering is a lot like rough construction. You'll love it. And it wasn't anything like rough construction, a whole lot of math. But made it through, failed 19 math classes along the way, but pushed through, got the engineering degree, and then went back overseas and built natural gas plants in the Middle East for, I want to say 4 or 5 years. And then I had a good friend that was killed in Afghanistan while I was over there. So I put in the paperwork, went back into government service as a federal agent, went back overseas and spent 27 or 29 months straight, or pretty much straight, one tour after another in Afghanistan, and then finished up with a year in the Sudan. And then maybe about June 2018, I put in my resignation paperwork from Sudan and did a little bit of traveling and just kind of been really focusing on managing my own investments since then.
Well, that was definitely a quick overview, and you skipped the part where you got blown up in Afghanistan. So maybe, again, our listeners could get the full story there, but needless to say, it was an interesting career, and that was maybe not even the only sort of traumatic event, or at least a intense event that happened over your time. Is that safe to say?
Yeah, that's safe to say. The attack that you're talking about, that was where the Taliban drove a 5,000-pound V-bin truck bomb into the camp I was at with 300 of my guys, and they injured 54 of my guys that night. And that was probably, honestly, I thought I thought I was going to die that night, but we were able to get through it, and then it was just kind of, there's always something happening there. So like when Afghanistan beat India during the cricket game, that was a big deal. And it just so happens that one of my neighbors had a PKM machine gun. That is his private weapon, I guess. So he decided to celebrate by lighting off the belt on his roof into the sky. And we were getting rounds skipping through our camp and thought we were receiving small arm fire from another attack starting. And it turns out this guy was just a really big Afghanistan cricket fan and real happy about the victory over India. So, I had my marksmen were asking like, "Hey, can we take the shot?" I'm like, "No, I don't think so. I know that guy. I think he's just really excited. We'll have to have a talk with the elders, at the next meeting about, hey, let's cut down on the machine gun fire into the air after cricket matches." But it was just, it's just always one thing or another.
What's that like for you? Do you feel like, I don't know, your perspective or your opinion on the world is completely different than the average civilian guy like myself because you've been there, or do you feel like, for the most part, all of the ideological views make sense for the people who hold them? Or what's that like for you, kind of being back in the U.S. now and hearing all the opinions about geopolitics from people who haven't experienced it?
I try not, in a way, I try not to pay too much attention to it. Um, Simply because it's not the average person or the average American whose opinion that I disagree with. A lot of it, and I think this is pretty safe to say for most guys who get over to these far-flung places and get their boots on the ground, that the reality when you're there rarely reflects what is being portrayed in the news or by politicians or analysts. And I don't even really think that that's their fault necessarily, simply since they're not there and they're trying to understand from 8,000 miles away what's happening. And that's just very hard to do. So it's almost like it's like you have two deviations away from the real event, right? So you have what's happening there on the ground that guys like myself and gals are seeing and living our lives in. And then you have the first standard deviation away of the media that's writing about it 8,000 miles away. And then you have the second standard deviation away when the public gets that information and tries to absorb it into make it make sense with their value system and what they're experiencing in their everyday lives, around them as well in their community. And so it's interesting when I come back and I hear people's opinion, and like it used to, like after Iraq, that really upset me when I came back in 2003. And what was upsetting was realizing that my friends and I were over there sacrificing, and America was just at a country music concert like nothing was going on. But that was me in my early 20s, and now here I am at 40 after having a decade overseas, to where now it just feels normal. And I've kind of learned to just think that people have their own opinions, and it's not even their fault that they don't even understand what's going on over there. And in a lot of ways, when you get there, you just realize people are people wherever they're at. Everyone's just kind of trying to do the best they can and really just kind of take care of their family, and they're kind of really concerned about what's happening today in my life and maybe 60 miles around me. And probably the biggest thing that helped me overseas was actually coming from a agricultural background, because that's all those guys really cared about was farming over there. So, in a way, I kind of wish that more people had the chance to travel and experience the world like I did, because I think they would find that it's actually not that different than being here, the people there. It's just that when that message gets past 8,000 miles, it's like a game of telephone is what it is.
We've imagined and experienced to some extent at Essential Craftsman how people from every culture respect and recognize not just quality craftsmanship and good work, but even like a sense of like a type of camaraderie among tradesmen and just people who work with their hands, and certainly also high level craftsmanship. Even from centuries ago, everybody can recognize and appreciate that. Did did you notice that same thing? I mean, you were working in construction areas overseas, so you were actually, shoulder to shoulder with tradesmen and guys doing hard work. So is that kind of just romantic fantasy that's the way it works? That it's sort of like music and transcends culture, or is it something like that?
No, it's very much like that. And what I found interesting was that you'd get a group of guys, and they all kind of specialized in one thing. So, and they all worked well together. So, and I think what would happen is somewhere years ago, one of them was able to come to the Middle East, and they picked up that skill set, and then they just kind of started passing it down to either their family or friends from whatever village they were at back home. So, and it was kind of neat to see, because you'd have these skill set concentrations like within one demographic, and then but they all became very good at that skill set. So like my scaffolders were all from Nepal. I have no idea how the Nepalese got into scaffolding in the Middle East. I don't know if it's because the home country is that mountainous and they're just that good with heights, but I mean, those guys, they could give the Circus Olay a run for their money. I'd come out there, and I'd tell Musaf, my Nepalese scaffolder foreman, exactly what I needed. He'd take a look, it'd be 80 feet in the air, and he'd be like, "Yes, sir, no problem, we'll take care of it." And then all my pipe fitters were mostly from the Indian subcontinent. My machine heavy operators were the Sikhs, and and then my electricians and my instrumentation guys were all from the Philippines. But they all had their very specific way of doing things, and it was interesting how what I was used to craftsmanship in the U.S., like they would be able to accomplish the same thing, but in a different way, because they didn't necessarily have the tools that we did in the U.S. But it was very interesting to see.
So you grew up in agriculture and rough framing and such, so being on a job site was a familiar place for you, but maybe go talk about that a little more. In what ways was it different? Certainly the tools were different, and the methods, but did it have the same kind of general feeling? Was there, a sense of, I don't know if there's camaraderie on big jobs, but certainly everybody's in the same boat for a period of time. And so obviously there's like language barriers among these different, tradesmen as well. So what was like the overall job site like when you're in the Middle East working with people from 14 different countries?
It was probably the biggest job site I've ever been on, in my entire life, because it wasn't just, because those natural gas trains are almost a mile long. I mean, they're just massive pieces of construction. So, even the part that I was responsible for, so I had about 10 foremen and 10 crews working under me from, 9 or 10 different countries. And we were responsible for about $250,000 in deliverables to the client, but that was just a very small portion of that entire job. And everybody kind of had their own section and their own work area for what they were responsible for. And it was kind of, in a way, I would say not having a common language kind of binds you all together. So, and what I mean by that is all of them would learn English. And what I noticed was my English actually became worse. Like I started just, because it's like if you try to order food, instead of being hey, is this takeout? It's like, no, it's takeaway. And I still say takeaway all the time. But you kind of just form you form a
Yeah.
common bond because these guys are from the Philippines, from the Indian subcontinent. And it was interesting. Like I had two Indian crews trying to work together one day, and neither one of them could understand each other because they were from different places in India. And I had no idea that there were so many languages in India. I think there's, and I don't even know how many there are. I think there's like something like 30 or 40 languages just within that one country. And so here was these two group of guys from India that were having to
Huh.
speak English just because neither one of them could talk to each other. But so everyone spoke English, but it was just kind of in varying degrees, and they'd all give each other different nicknames. And it was interesting seeing the nicknames they'd give each other because they would do it based on how they liked the sound of the English words, not necessarily the like meaning behind them. So, you'd run across the guy and you'd be asking your foreman, where, hey, who's doing this welding here? And he's like, oh, sir, that's hot and spicy. I got hot and spicy on that job. And I'd be like, hot and spicy. And he's like, oh, yes, sir, that's his English name. And I'd be like, and this guy would show up just wearing sunglasses under a hard hat, just with this crazy grin on his face, and he'd have hot and spicy with flames on his hard hat. And, and I'd be like, all right, man, hey, this is good work. I like these welds. And he's like, oh, thank you, sir. Just, and, they would just run with it. I mean, but it would, it was just it was just a lot of fun. It was just a lot of fun.
Can you describe that? I'm going to really show my cards about how little I know about natural gas, but what do you mean the train is a mile long? Maybe
Oh,
start
yeah,
big
yeah.
picture about how natural gas even comes out of the ground. And could you give me a little more context about what this actually all might kind of look like?
Well, yes, absolutely. So just kind of at the 50,000 foot view, um, there specifically for Qatar, the natural gas fields were offshore, so they were actually offshore underneath the water. So they actually had to drill down, tap into the natural gas field offshore. Then they would actually pipe the gas into land. And because of that gas that they had there, so natural gas all kind of has like there's different varying degrees and different types of natural gas. Like some are I'm going to say what they would refer to as sweet, and some are sour gas. And specifically there for Qatar, they had their gas was a bit sour, which meant it had sulfur in it. And so these natural gas trains, when the natural gas comes ashore from the piping, in that train, it's basically they call it a train because it's several different phases all stacked back to back to back. So you have raw gas coming in, or you have raw sour gas coming in one end, and basically it goes through. I think there's, man, I'm having a hard time even remembering. I want to say there's 10 to 12 different stages that it goes through in this mile long train, which is really just a processing facility. So like 10 different phases in the process before you get
Mm.
liquefied natural gas out the other end. And the liquefied natural gas is where they basically, through this train, they
Wow.
refine the gas, condense it, liquefy it. And the liquefied natural gas is the state that it goes in onto the tankers. So they didn't just have, the offshore, the piping,
Huh.
a mile long processing facility. Then they actually built out all the pipelines going to the harbor, and they built entire port facilities to load up these massive cargo ships that take liquefied natural gas all over the world. And so the liquefied natural gas comes out the other side, goes
Mm.
into the tanker, and then the tanker goes to China, to Europe, to wherever that gas is sold. And the thing about Qatar that was specifically interesting is those guys were vertically integrated. So they owned everything from the gas under the seabed all the way through actually giving physical delivery of that liquefied natural gas at the point of sale, either in Europe or China, and just was making money hand over fist.
Oh, that's really interesting. So it makes sense. They develop these facilities. When you say in a mile, you mean literally it's a mile long, rather than
Correct.
the pipe going back and forth inside one building and taking up a mile. They just kind of keep it in line with the pipe, and by the time it gets to the loading station onto the trucks, it's liquefied, and they just fill them up. Am I getting that?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, there's condensers and there's all kinds of different phases. And when I say a mile long, like I mean, there's all kinds of machinery that are in these trains. And I mean, I'd even hate to say like how wide these things are. I mean, it's a mile long and then just hundreds of yards wide. And, they even have they even built super trains out there, which are
Oh,
basically two
wow.
running together. So, when I was there, I think they were getting the fifth train online. And so, when we would drive to work in the morning, it was like driving past a forest of cranes out there. I mean, a 250,000 men went to work every day out there in it
Mm.
was called Ras Laffan Industrial City, but RLIC. 250,000 men went to work out there every day.
Holy smokes, that's amazing. So now let's kind of transition here a little bit. And I'm wondering if you have the same problem I do, and that is, I grew up working with my hands, chores with the family and such, and our viewers know my dad. He's the epitome of hard work, and so in my mind and in my heart, I always feel like that is what work is, and it's sometimes a struggle for me at a computer or working with my brain to, I don't know, feel as, it's not about feeling productive, but I'm wondering if you if you work with your hands at all, if you feel like that's something you at this point in your life do or need to do, and if what's that like now, working, writing, and being at a computer more, and I guess there was a transition phase as an engineering, but talk about that a little bit if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So I struggled with the exact same thing. And I would say that I sometimes still struggle with it because, when you grow up with that mindset, my dad is very similar to yours, very hands on and, has worked hard his entire life. And something that I struggled with was making that transition from, I don't want to call it work hard, work smart. But at the same time, there is an element of when you're used to working with your hands, when you're used to being productive all day and being able to stand back and said, hey, I did that today. I went and cleared that field or I went and built that building. I have something to show for my effort today. That's a completely different type of work than sitting down and, hey, I need to read a 100-page article on how semiconductors are being brought into the trade war between China and the United States. And that's my job today is I'm going to read this 100-page article and try to make sense of that information. And at times it will, at times I still feel like, man, I didn't do anything today when in fact I've been here, thinking and writing and reading for 12 hours. And, so where it really, what really made the difference to me was I had a very good mentor when I was in college. So just kind of by just by luck, him and I met, and it's turned into at least a 15-year friendship. I mean, I still talk to him once a week, but he was the one that
Hmm.
was able to really start making me think more on the business side of things, as far as, hey, it's great to work hard, but you also need to think about how to leverage your time and leverage your knowledge and make that transition. And it wasn't, I had a hard time understanding that, okay, if I'm not the one actually going and grabbing those valves and putting that valve in, or, swinging that hammer, it's no less as hard or as important of work standing back and being a leader and making sure all my guys that are doing the work have everything they need, and that I'm running interference at, the management level to make sure that they're not having to worry about scheduling or, payroll or anything like that. So I had a tough time. So my mentor really helped me with that. And then when I got to Cutter and I took over my first crew, I was going and getting the guys the valves they needed, just jumping in there and working like I was used to doing it at 19. And it it was a little bit of a painful transition to realize that isn't what my guys needed. My guys, because at the time it was an electrical crew, and then I had a piping crew that I
Hmm.
ran as well. And I had a hard time understanding at first that that's not what my guys needed. They were doing the work. What they needed was me to help them and support them on the paperwork side to make their life easier, and just to kind of start clearing the runway to where when they were done with one stage, they were just immediately rolling to the next. And that I had already taken care of all the coordination with other site supervisors, and just taking care of all that for them so they could just focus on their trade. And once I made that mental
Yeah,
click in
that's
my
great.
mind, that's where things really started getting easier. But I don't know if that ever really goes away. Like I'll still catch myself, 18 years onto this, sitting here in front of a computer for 12 hours, and I'll stand up and I'll think, man, I didn't do anything today. And that's just not true. But it's just I think that always sticks with you. If you came up with working with your hands, like you always just kind of feel, if you're sitting behind a computer, you just always feel like, man, I didn't do anything. So time to go for a walk or get outside and enjoy nature a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And for some people, myself included, I'm lucky to have a little workshop and a little bit of land, enough where I can take manual labor almost like a hobby, and on the weekend be like, I'm going to go dig out those sprinklers that are messed up, and you can kind of get some of that energy out. And frankly, I remember, when you're a kid, working is just pretty miserable, and it's like a torture basically. I remember every time it was like a work day, I was miserable, and my parents they're just always so happy doing it, and it was like truly enjoyable for them. And so I'm at that point now where working with my body and hands is a great hobby, and I think it's kind of clicking for me that that's the best place for it. I'm glad that my
Absolutely.
paycheck doesn't rely on my strength in my back, but it's really a great hobby to have, working and home repair and these types of things. So it's I'm fortunate in that way, but I hear you. So last question, and you mentioned China, and I've asked several people this, and you would be a great one to chime in as well. And I'm wondering if you can just give me and the audience a big picture from your point of view, because there is so much noise about China. And for me personally, I understand, I think the big picture, but I'm always just reminded that I get so many inexpensive goods from China that benefit my life regularly. I don't have any reason to dislike any particular thing about the country that I experience tangibly, and so the cheap goods are positive. So can you explain from your point of view just the big picture geopolitical struggle and why there's so much noise, and how maybe average people should be thinking, and if that differs from the story we're being told from the media? Your point of view, of course, but I would really
Yeah.
be interested.
Okay. So so I spent several years in Asia, and kind of the way that I look at China is probably a little bit different than most people look at China, or they think of how China's being portrayed. And for me, let's start with the math. Let's start with at the very high level with the demographics. Okay, so because I think the to try to build a steelman argument for how China's portrayed in the media is that, hey, China's a rising superpower. They have a third of the world's population. They're the number two economy in the world. They're growing quickly. They're building energy plants there and industrializing, and they've done an amazing feat, essentially industrializing in 40 years and becoming the manufacturer for the world. I don't want to take that away from them, but at the same time, I don't think that growth continues exponentially like it has, which is what I feel the common theme is. Does that seem fair?
Yeah.
So my view of it is, where I think I differ is, having seen Asia firsthand, and specifically doing like anti-piracy operations in the Strait of Malacca, which for people that aren't familiar, it's a narrow strip of water that connects the entirety of Asia to the Indian Ocean. And so you have if you come in through from the Indian Ocean, you go through the Strait of Malacca, which at its narrowest point is about 2 miles wide. And then you come through and you exit either into the South China Sea and then on towards the Pacific. Now, the reason that I'm starting with that and why that is so important to me with Asia is because 80% of China's energy flows through the Strait of Malacca. So, the thing that makes the United
Mm.
States a global power is the fact that we have a naval force that can secure the seas, and we can actually secure our own energy needs. For all intents and purposes, the United States is actually energy independent currently with the fracking technology we've developed, and how we're able to do productive or domestic oil and gas work. China is never going to be in that position. They're always going to be dependent on energy imports. And I was reading several weeks ago how they're expected to actually increase those energy exports by 400% over the next decade. Right. So starting from that position, the reason that I don't think China is a rising power is, how can you be a rising power when you can't secure your own energy needs? Right. Now, secondly, looking at the demographics. So China implemented a one-child policy in about 1980, right? And they did that because at the time they were trying very, very hard to industrialize. So if you're a farmer, then kids is free labor, right? You can have 4 kids because you need that for farm work. Well, once you start putting people in apartments and you say, "Hey, you're not a farmer anymore. You're going to go be a mechanic in this factory, and we're going to start making plastic swimming pools to ship to America." Well, all of a sudden, you don't want that guy having 4 kids. You want him only having 1 kid because he only needs one child in an apartment living in the city. Well, unfortunately, what that did though, when they did that one child policy,
Mm-hmm.
now when you look at their demographics, they have, if you're a millennial in America and you feel like there's more baby boomers than millennials, imagine being a Chinese millennial and you're 25 years old and there's twice as many old Chinese baby boomers that are all getting ready to
Oh, wow.
retire that you're going to have to support
Mm.
than you. So it becomes a matter of, it doesn't matter if there's a third of the world's
Mm.
population. It's about the ratio of old people to young people, essentially. And for an economy to keep growing, you need
Mm.
less old people than more young people because, think about guys that are our age. We're buying cars, expanding houses, buying Christmas gifts for kids, all the things that the baby boomers are not doing now that they're getting ready to retire. So they're saving money. They've bought everything they really need for their entire life, and they're not really consuming as much as younger generations. So when I look at China and I see what that one child policy has done 40 years on now, because all those 1 kids are now, millennials and in their prime working years. Yes, they've done amazing things getting to where they have the last 40 years, but I don't think that growth is eternal. They've kind of, that one child policy has really
Mm.
damaged their internal demographics. And so how does that relate to the US? I mean, then you can start talking a little bit about Taiwan because Taiwan is very good with semiconductors specifically, and so there are several U.S. companies that do what's called fabless manufacturing with semiconductors in Taiwan, and that's where they basically do the design work in the U.S. Semiconductors are manufactured in China, or excuse me, in Taiwan, and then they're shipped to the U.S. or sold to China. China by far imports the most semiconductors from Taiwan. They get about 38% of their semiconductors from Taiwan. Reason that's important is because China is
Mm.
by far the largest manufacturer of electronics and things like that. Right. So where I'm going with all this is when
Mm.
you really look at it from the top
Mm.
down, you have China that can't secure their own energy imports. They have, unfortunately, a self-inflicted wound, in my opinion, with demographics, because there's twice as many people that are their parents' age now to support, and they don't have any way
Mm.
to express their opinion or the fact that they might want something to change because they live under communism, right?
Mhm.
And so when I look at China, they've
Mhm.
done amazing things. I enjoyed my time there. The
Mm.
Chinese people have always been good to me. I kind of just feel bad for them though, and I don't think that the popular opinion of, hey, China's going to be this power in the 21st century is really accurate. I think there's going to be other places in Asia that are going to do very well, but I don't think China's going to be one of them.
All right, Radigan. Well, let's change the topic here to investing, and let me sort of at least set the table from my life and my view on this topic. And primarily over even just the last 10 years, it seems like there's been so much chaos. In 2008, I graduated college in 2008, and that was when all those bailouts happened and the job market crashed. I was paying attention to that, and of course Bitcoin kind of came into existence right then. And between then and now, it's been quantitative easing by the Fed, and even more recently, this Robinhood, not just the fiasco and the GameStop assault on hedge funds, but even just the existence of it, where we can now kind of invest without paying fees and these types of things. And so I have felt for a while like investing is I work so hard for every dollar that I have. And I either worked really hard for it or I sacrificed by not spending it. and saving it. And so my wife and I have this little amount of money, and maybe I'm fearful, but man, it's hard for a guy like me to get excited about investing money, at least in a traditional way. So that's one thing I really would love to get your opinion on. And I have a feeling our listeners, there's a big portion of them that are tradesmen who work harder than I do, who probably sacrifice more than I do. And if I feel that way, I'm sure they feel that way even more. So can you talk a little bit about the lay of the land in investing, and maybe we'll kind of pivot to how it is that blue collar types or tradesmen or even professionals who are protective of their money might approach it in this day and age, when it seems like all the previous rules just kind of aren't as relevant these days.
Absolutely. So, I know I'm going to have a very different opinion on investing and than most people will, and that's mostly because I would say that I'm self-taught. Because similar to you and your listeners with the guys in the trades, when I was overseas, I worked very hard for that money. And the reason I even got into investing and actually started taking an interest in this was because when I started looking at things and saying, "Hey, I need to invest. I need to be smarter with my money," I couldn't find a financial advisor that would actually prove to me or show me that what he was telling me to do and how to invest actually worked. And I kind of started thinking about that, and I thought, from doing construction and doing engineering, if I say something works, I can walk out there and I can show you that it works. I can show you I can show you the designs I do. I can show you that, the kind of work I do. And it bothered me that when I had this money that was very important to me, that had come very dearly, when I was trying to do the right thing with it and invest, I couldn't find someone who I thought would watch it as closely as I did, because it's my money. And I would say that that was the first realization for me, was understanding that no one's going to care about your money more than you do, right? They're just not going to do it. At best, you're going to be able to find someone who tries to be a good steward of that money. And so that led me down this path of really trying to set my own financial life in order. And I would say, before even I started investing, I realized that I kind of needed to lay the foundation. And, similar to construction, how it seems like you always spend the most time, doing the surveying, laying the foundation, getting all the utilities put in, then all of a sudden the building goes up, right? And where I'm going with that with investing is what I realized first was, hey, I need to make sure all my insurance is in place, right? I had to get a good accountant to where, I made sure that I was doing the right thing with taxes and being able to maximize the money I was saving there first. And I would say, before, the first step to me for investing was making sure that I wasn't bleeding money out that I didn't need to bleed out. So, the insurance was in place, then had a good accountant to save me money, made sure that my credit was doing well, because that way, there's no difference between making an extra 5% on an investment and saving an extra 5%, because you can get a better loan rate if you need it, right? So did the credit. And then the next thing after that was the emergency fund. And, people have different numbers. For me personally, I like having 1 year. And I would say that's mostly just because of how dangerous the job was overseas, right? There was a very real chance that I could be injured and have a very long recovery and be out of work for a long time. So that's probably personal for everybody, but I built that first before I even really got serious about investing. And, when I was doing all this, it's very easy to feel like you're behind, right? That that you're spinning your wheels and you're not getting anywhere, because, hey, you're not investing and you're not in the market. But at the same time, looking back on it, what I realized was how important that foundation was, because once you have that foundation built and you have that durability in your life, then you can actually start looking outwards, and you're not worried about what happens if the unexpected happens to you. And then you can actually be looking outwards and be looking for new opportunities to start putting that money to work. And once I started looking at the different markets and I started looking at the different strategies, um, the first one I came across was, hey, just do passive investing, do these ETFs or these index funds, and just dollar cost average in, and the math is behind that to support it. As far as if you don't try to time the market, if you just keep putting money in regularly into these ETFs, then as the market goes up and you're investing, you're in the market, and you slowly build your wealth over time. And for me, I did that for a while, and then I really started taking a deeper dive into how the markets are actually structured underneath. And I think that this is something that GameStop even just recently exposed, right? So you mentioned 2008, and there's a very good documentary on it that where they had the key players like Paulson and Ben Bernanke. They were interviewing them 10 years on. I think it's by the Council of Foreign Relations on YouTube. It's called Panic or something like that. But what it does is that 10 years on, it goes back and it's interviewing these guys who were intimately involved in 2008, and it's them explaining just how close the global financial system came to seizing up because of the derivatives and how interconnected the system is with what they call liquidity, which is essentially just the flow of dollars around the world. And when I started looking at passive investing, and I understand that people are going to disagree with this, but for me, when I started looking at it, I realized, hey, what's enabling passive investing and not worried about timing the market? What's enabling that to succeed is the fact that central banks continue to bail out companies and continue with what I think is bad behavior as far as bailing out companies who don't have any money on their balance sheet and are poorly run, to continue providing this liquidity or the flow of capital into these markets that continues to have these markets go up. And so I remember 2008. I was working overseas when 2008 happened, and for me, once I kind of started realizing how the financial system is structured like that underneath, that was something I didn't really want to participate in. I didn't want to be a part of that. So that actually led me to Bitcoin in 2016. I bought, because then I was like, well, this is math. I can understand this. So and it was very risky at the time. I didn't really even understand what I was doing. I felt like I was taking a ransom photo, holding up a sign saying for trading purposes only. It was like magic internet money. And but I would, but I would say that being able to take that risk like that with with capital, the reason I was able to do that was because I had that firm foundation already laid. And I knew that, okay, even if I take this risk, the potential reward is significant, but there's also, I could lose it all, but that's still going to be okay. I'm willing to take this risk on it. And, I think there's things out there that, so what I'm looking at now, specifically with investing, and this is what I would really encourage uh, everyone to do, is specifically after 2020 with the pandemic that we've had, with how hard hit small businesses have been. I was actually just talking with a good friend about this, because when you look in the market, uh, one of the primary measures that I kind of like to use just as kind of a yardstick to measure how expensive businesses are is enterprise value to sales. And basically, what that is it's just taking the total value of the business itself divided by how much revenue the business is bringing in. And you can do this for anything. You can do this for Amazon. You can do this for Tesla. You can do this if you have a plumbing business. You can do this for your plumbing business, right? And you can get this ratio. And this friend and I, we were talking about this and we were looking at it. And when you look at the market right now, you're going to be looking at, I haven't looked at Apple today. I think it was like 8 times, it was like 8 times enterprise value to sales. Tesla was at like 27 enterprise value to sales. And what that means is that ratio means when Tesla's at 27 EV to sales, that means that if they took every dollar they earned in and gave it back to shareholders, it would take you 27 years to get all your money back from buying a share in that business today, which they can just never do, right? They got to pay taxes, they got to pay research and development. They have all these massive overheads and these costs from just running the business. So, but the reason I like using that is it kind of keeps me sane, right? I can look at that and say, okay, if I buy a share today, it's going to take 27 years to get that back. Well, then you can go and look at local businesses after the 2020, after the year we've had, and you can look at local businesses where that are selling at 1x. That you can buy a local business for 1 to maybe even 3 on the high end of enterprise value to sales. And the reason that's important is because to me, it doesn't matter if I'm buying index funds or if I'm buying individual large cap companies in the market, or if I'm buying a plumbing or electrician business that's local. It's all about making the return. And on local businesses, if you're able to buy a local business that's 1 or 2x enterprise value to sales, well, if you're making a 15 to 20% return on your money, on the business, you're absolutely beating the market. And plus, to me, the way I'm thinking about this now is someone whose writing has made a dramatic impact on me is a investor by the name of Anthony Deaton. And he some of his older articles are online at the Edelweiss Journal. And he stresses how his focus is on scarcity, durability, and independence as far as when he invests in a business. And that's actually the direction I'm moving to with investing. And that's something that I would probably encourage most people to think about if they want to get into investing, because it removes the part of saying, hey, I need to buy an index fund, or hey, I need to be in the market to invest. And instead, I think it opens up a lot more opportunities that are around you, because then you can say, well, if I'm building houses, I can be aware of an opportunity that someone else might not be aware of. And you're going to know what scarcity is because it's in your local area and it's very much in your wheelhouse of competency. And you're going to have the independence if you have that firm foundation laid, as far as, hey, if I take this risk and it doesn't work out, or if there's a downturn, it's okay. My family's going to be all right. We still have a year buffer of income. And so I know this is a long drawn out answer, but for me, it was very much making the transition of just thinking of me as a person and making money in my job and then putting it into the market, and almost thinking about myself as my own entity, to where I need to have, cash on hand. I have a balance sheet. And when I'm investing, it's very much in evaluating these opportunities and determining where I'm going to be able to make a good return for the risk that I'm taking with that money.
I think a lot of tradesmen, and myself included, although I don't think of myself, although I'm not a tradesman, but investing in real estate, and in particular rental real estate, is one of the first places that guys like me will go in their mind and with their money, because they understand it. It's they can put their hands on it. They might have a bit of a advantage because they can repair it and maintain it to some extent. But what I quickly found when I owned rental properties was just how much work it is. There's nothing passive about it. And when I was younger, I just imagined, oh, you're a landlord, you collect the money and you can't lose, and you got depreciation. But it's just not like that at all. And maybe that's okay if it's just more of a business than a passive investment. So I guess, and I'm wondering, you mentioned investing in local businesses, and I've never had an opportunity to do that. But what does that look like? I'm trying to imagine that. I guess you're kind of investing in people, and is there a way to invest in a business or real estate that is more passive, or are you talking about becoming a business owner and being an active participant in the management and growth of whatever business, or is there a way to do this and have it be actually passive?
Yes. So there's something I saw my mentor do was he actually bought into shares of a local bank that was starting up, and that was initially with capital that was put into the local bank, and then actually had had shares of that business, right? So he gets a dividend paid every year based on the profits of that bank that's coming in and the shares that he has underlying in the bank. Uh, and then the other opportunity that I'm actually evaluating now that a friend of mine in Texas is doing is he's actually an LP or a limited partner in a real estate fund that you can buy, shares of the real estate fund that holds this multifamily property. And this isn't specific to Texas; it's all over. And depending on how it's structured, you might need to be
Mm-hmm.
an accredited investor. But even if you're not an accredited investor, there are funds out there that you can invest in, but you really have to do your due diligence on who's running them, how they're structuring their deals. I mean, even dig into, how much money are they putting forward for repairs, for paying employees, how they're managing these projects. And when you find those relationships that, for me, that I take, I'll take years to evaluate these, right? Because I want someone that is going to be a good decision maker on that part of their deal. So those opportunities exist. It's just having to kind of find them and then really do your homework on them to make sure that you're not being sold something that isn't going to be good for you, right? Because there's very much people that are out there that will take advantage, and it's a matter of finding someone that you trust. And me personally, I focus on the relationship, and I think about it as, hey, is this someone that I think I could trust my life to? Because for me, my money is my life. Like I had to go through a lot to make it. So, and it's not even about the return or those opportunities that exist for passive income that are out there privately. Is that person a person of integrity? Are they going to make the right decision for me because that's the values that they have, and that's kind of what I look for. But those opportunities are out there,
Mm.
and they do exist.
It reminds me, when you like buy a new car or truck and all of a sudden you see that same car and truck like all over the place, you just were never looking for it. I know from my career in real estate that deals and investments do exist in the world all around us all the time, but very few people are tuned to the frequency to locate them and to snatch them up when they surface. So almost just, and you're kind of reminding me of this thought, being aware of this potential investment type can in and of itself help you stumble into them because you're paying attention and communicating this way with friends and family, and when you think about something, when it's a part of your thought process, it's just so much more likely to come into fruition. Oh, and I'm reminded another advantage of this. I have a friend who was involved in rental real estate in a large scale. In I think he might have started in like 2008 or six or something, and from about 2011 or 2012 maybe, Wall Street first realized, because real estate prices were lower than they had been in 50 years,
Hmm.
and Wall Street kind of recognized we we can't get up. Here's this opportunity in the country right now with the real estate price so low, and we have no ability to invest in that. Now they have since figured that out, and so now Wall Street is invested in residential real estate in some big companies like Treehouse or Invitation Homes,
Yeah.
and I think there's others, but the point is some of these a small bank or even like a small cabinet shop or something, Wall Street can't invest in that. So you don't have to compete with them because they're not able to get there. It can only be an individual investor, accredited or not. And so that's an advantage that people should, I don't know, take a little bit of comfort in, that they can snatch deals up that bigger outfits are incapable of doing.
I actually think that's a strategic advantage that most people don't realize they have. So if you want to go the passive route and just dollar cost average and not worry about the market, like that's one way to do it. But to me, you're actually giving up an incredible strategic advantage you have as an individual investor if you limit yourself just to that. I mean, you have a lot more independence if you're out there just kind of attuned to uh, what's happening in the community around you and those deals like that. And something else that I've found is, not a lot of people that are doing this, they're not going out there and advertising that they're doing it. They're actually very quiet individuals because, I mean, if when you're talking about money, it's just not something that the guys that are really making money, that's not something they really advertise. And what I've noticed is that the further I go in this, and the more years I'm doing it, if I'm trying to figure something out, odds are there's someone else that is doing it as well, and you just kind of find yourself in the same places with the same kind of people, and people that are further down that road than you, that might be
Mm.
an older generation, that they might have an opportunity that they want to invest in, but they want to bring other investors in uh, simply to cut down on their risk for that particular deal. And what I've noticed is that once you find people you can trust, it very much becomes a relationship game, to where as new deals come up, then you start getting phone calls for it, and it just becomes easier the longer you do it.
You've written about your mission in life and just the mindset of having something as a personal mission. Can you talk a little bit about, see, investing is on the surface not that fun. It's much more fun to buy a dirt bike and spend your money on that. And I'm wondering if you could talk about maybe not the fun, but certainly the satisfaction, or why should people choose, let's say younger guys or our age maybe, why should they choose to sacrifice, spend this money and get involved in investing, as opposed to a more fun way to blow the money? Maybe the better way to ask the question: is there some type of fun or satisfaction or value that you receive from investing that makes it worth the effort, separate from being wise and planning for your future and all that?
I would say it's the peace of mind. I mean, who doesn't like going and riding dirt bikes? But do you want to go ride a dirt bike and take a fall off of that, and then you're laid up for 6 months and you can't work? Like I've been in the position of, where I racked up 15,000 in hospital bills, and I was sleeping on a friend's couch. So because I couldn't afford to stay at the Marriott while I was getting my medical clearance back to go back to Afghanistan. Like for me, I don't ever want to be in that position again. No amount of having fun without having like that base established, to where I know I can take care of myself financially, is worth it to me. And I think that's something that everyone kind of has to figure out on their own, right? It's going to be, and for me, once I started investing and I started going down this route, it very much becomes a craft. Just like whether you're doing timber framing, or if you're a welder and you take a lot of pride in how you lay a weld. Um, you know, I think people think of investing as strictly passive, and you can spend as much time as you want on it. But to me, it just becomes very much a craft, to where there's no end in sight. Like I can do this the rest of my life if I choose to, and I probably will. Like I'll do this. I'll do this as long as I
Yeah.
got. And so I appreciate the craft point of it, to where it just becomes something constantly to hone, something constantly to learn, something new. And I appreciate the peace of mind it gives me, to where when I do go out and have fun, I'm not worried about one bad day, drastically altering my life anymore, which is, I don't know if I could put a price on that one.
I think the Federal Reserve and the mindset around interest rates is so out of whack, and people are used to being able to borrow money at 3 or 4 or 5%, and it has kind of warped people's ideas, both about what they can borrow and what that should cost, but also what they should be entitled to receive when they lend it out. I mentioned a hard money loan I was involved into a friend, and I told him the rate was 14%, and he recoiled like I was such an idiot for taking this loan because that number is so high. And I kind of put the blame. It's not blame. It's just the reality that the money that the Fed and Wall Street can play with is just so different, the money we are able to access. So
Right.
could you talk about that a little bit? Because I don't know if it's the specifics aren't important, like what do you think is a good rate of return? Obviously not 3%, but maybe it doesn't have to be 14 either, but maybe from both sides, from borrowing and lending. And how should we think about return on investment now when, like I said, our mortgages, or I just refied or bought a house. It was a purchase, not a refi. And the rate closed at like 3.6 or something like that. It's just, it's kind of unbelievable. And it's hard for that not to just change the way you think about what money is worth.
Right. So, when you're mentioning the Federal Reserve and the interest rates, first off, I don't have any debt. I don't want to have any debt. I don't want to owe anybody money. Everything I do is just with cash on hand. And I do that for a very specific reason because, when I look at what the governments around the world, and it's not just the Federal Reserve, it's all the central banks around the world. When I look at the game that they're playing, in some ways, I kind of think of it as a race to the bottom, right? It's a race to the bottom to devalue their currencies, to push interest rates low. And, and there's a very specific reason they're doing that. The developed world is getting old. It's not just our baby boomers that are retiring, it's Europe's, it's China's, and, as you push interest rates low, what that does is that forces people to go take risk with their money because they can't make a safe return in bonds. So the government's doing this on purpose as far as pushing interest rates low to make people get out of bonds, to not hold treasuries. And you know what? If you don't like making 1.6% in TLT and 20-year treasuries, then you need to go invest in the market and keep that market going higher. And they're doing that because they have to, because the baby boomers are getting ready to retire. So the Federal Reserve and the government is very much in tune to what the stock markets are doing and not wanting to have them fall. So they're going to keep interest rates low, in my opinion. But unfortunately, what that does for, I'm going to say guys like us that are in our prime working years, is it makes it very hard to get a return on our money in a way that doesn't involve us actually having to learn finances and actually learn investing and actually start evaluating businesses. And, and when you're saying that it almost changes the way we look at money and the value of money, I absolutely agree, because people start thinking that, but the way that I look at it is, if someone's trying to give me almost free money, do I really want that? If money has no value, or the money has very little value to the government, why do I want to go into debt? Me personally, I don't want to. I want that independence of knowing that the cash I have is mine and I don't owe anyone else, because what that does is that actually puts me in a safer position if there's a change in the business cycle. So, right now the government and the Federal Reserve are very much in tune with what the market's doing. They're trying to keep this business cycle expanded. But what I'm concerned with is that if you have either an inflationary or a deflationary force that acts on this business cycle, what happens then? And I don't want to guess in which direction it's going to go. So what I do is I don't go into debt. I don't use loans for investments I'm doing, and then I'm also looking at assets that I can invest in that will do well, whether this business cycle continues or whether there are issues that happen, either inflationary or deflationary. Because I just want to be in a position that I don't have to try to guess the future, and no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. And so, but it's hard. It's hard to find those opportunities, and it's hard to think about money in a way that has value, because what they've done is they've made interest rates so low. And when you're saying 14% on a hard money loan, like that's about the ballpark. I frequently read about debt deals that they're doing in Europe. And in Europe for real estate, they're getting 15 to 20% on mezzanine debt in the capital stack for real estate investment. So they're getting a 15 to 20% return over 1 to 3 years on their mezzanine debt for hard money loan, and they're getting a 25% margin of safety on it. Simply because, but it's in those areas where the banks can't get to. So you got to be in those areas where the banks can't get that free money into, and then all of a sudden, your capital has value again, because there's a lot of people that don't have access to that very low interest rate.
Our viewers may know, but I built a storage facility a few years ago, and so I was on the opposite side of this conversation by needing to borrow money for someone to help me build this. And I can tell you, as someone who was there, the need and the energy from the person on the opposite side of the table, the person needing to borrow to solve this deal or this business deal, is those people are looking ferociously as well, fiercely, for the investors. And when you find that person and it links up, it's magic, and it's the way the world should work. And so from the investors side, those guys are out there. You just got to find them. And I'm sure there's someone listening to this who may be in this position who knows, if I had $100,000, I could boom, 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 and within 3 years my business would look like this. But that's a real hurdle. And so it's a matter of those two individuals finding each other. Don't give up. They're certain that you're both out there, and keep your eyes peeled. Is that more or less what you're saying to us? I guess that's what I'm saying. What would you say?
No, I'd agree 100% with that, because, in a way, I think it really created a bifurcated market, right? So you have people's expectations that, hey, we can get a 2.9% interest on our mortgage. But then you have the opposite end of the spectrum, where there's a whole group of people out there that can't get access to this, nearly free money. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, it's like finding an oasis in the desert where money has value again, but it's out there.
Well, Radigan, maybe give our viewers the overview of your website and your writings. We didn't talk about your writing, but maybe to lead into that, just let us know how you got started writing, and where people can find that, and anything else that you'd like to leave our listeners with. Okay.
So I got started writing probably about a year ago. I haven't really read anything before about a year ago. And then when I started really getting into investing, I started having to put thoughts to paper. One of the side effects of this explosion was some memory loss. So writing just kind of helps me keep all the dots connected when I'm thinking about things. And so if people want to read more, and I kind of focus on things, and it's everything from geopolitics to investing to emotions. I mean, it's psychological. It's just a little bit of everything of kind of what I'm thinking on. And it's at radigancarter.com is where the writing is. And I'm pretty active on Twitter too. So if people are on Twitter, if they got questions, they can feel free to reach out. And it's just at Radigan Carter.
Well, that's great. I'm going to be following and reading your blog, because there is just so much noise. And even just knowing someone who kind of comes from the similar background, someone who understands what it's like to, work in the trades, spend a long day there, value your money in terms of even just the labor you put into to earn it, and can't recommend your work enough. So thanks for taking the time to join us. And the world is changing fast enough. I'm sure in a year or two we'll chat again, and who knows what the big next twist would be. But thanks for joining us, Radigan.
Hey, thanks for having me, Nate. Look forward to next time.